The city never truly slept. Even at dawn, when the sky hovered between night and morning, screens still glowed behind windows. Phones vibrated with notifications, and minds were already racing ahead of the day. Somewhere between advertisements, motivational quotes, and carefully curated social media feeds, a single message echoed everywhere. Happiness is just one step away. If you work harder, you'll be happy. If you earn more, you'll be happy. If you find the right partner, the right body, the right lifestyle, then, finally, you'll arrive. This promise was so familiar that few people questioned it. It was printed on billboards, whispered by influencers, reinforced by parents, teachers, and even well-meaning friends. It sounded reasonable. After all, who wouldn't want happiness? And if happiness could be achieved, why not chase it with everything we had? The man at the center of this story believed this promise deeply. He had no reason not to. From the outside, his life looked like proof that the formula worked. He had followed the path carefully. Education led to opportunity. Opportunity led to income. Income led to comfort. Comfort led to admiration. Each step felt like progress. Each achievement like a milestone closer to a brighter emotional future. When he bought his first expensive watch, he felt a rush of pride. When he moved into a larger apartment, there was excitement. When people praised his success, something warm spread through his chest. This is happiness, he told himself. But the feeling never stayed. It faded quietly, almost politely, leaving behind a strange aftertaste, a subtle restlessness that asked for more. The next goal, the next upgrade, the next proof that life was moving in the right direction. At first, this didn't bother him. He assumed this was simply how ambition worked. Desire was fuel. Dissatisfaction meant growth. Everyone around him seemed to feel the same way, even if they didn't say it out loud. They were all running, comparing, improving, chasing. The world applauded them for it. Yet late at night, when the noise of the day finally softened, something uncomfortable surfaced. A question without words. A quiet unease that no achievement could silence. Why don't I feel satisfied? He tried to ignore it. After all, the world had an answer ready. You're not there yet. You haven't reached the right level. You haven't unlocked the final version of happiness. So he kept going. The more he chased happiness, the more his life began to revolve around future moments. Happiness was always scheduled ahead of him. After the next success, after the next vacation, after the next relationship milestone. The present moment became merely a stepping stone, valuable only insofar as it led somewhere else. Unknowingly, he had stopped living now. From a Buddhist perspective, this is where the illusion quietly takes hold. The Buddha did not describe suffering only as pain, illness, or loss. He spoke of dukkha, a deeper dissatisfaction woven into ordinary life, the subtle tension of always wanting things to be different from how they are. This kind of suffering doesn't scream. It whispers. It hides behind smiles, productivity, and achievement. It convinces us that the problem is external, that happiness is missing because we haven't acquired the right conditions yet. Modern society amplifies this misunderstanding. Happiness is marketed like a product. It has an image, a timeline, and a checklist. And just like any product, it is never quite enough once obtained. A newer version is always coming. Neuroscience quietly confirms this. The human brain is not designed to maintain happiness as a stable state. Instead, it is wired for survival and improvement. When something desirable appears, money, praise, love, the brain releases dopamine, a chemical often mistaken for happiness. In reality, dopamine is about anticipation, not fulfillment. It pushes us forward, urging us to pursue, to obtain, to repeat. The moment we get what we want, dopamine subsides. The mind immediately scans the horizon for the next target. This is not a flaw. It is biology. But when a survival mechanism is mistaken for a happiness system, suffering begins. The man did not know this yet. He only knew that something felt off. He had done everything right, according to the rules he was given. And yet, Beneath the polished surface of his life, there was a quiet sense of emptiness, an absence that could not be filled with effort alone. One evening, after another long day of meetings and deadlines, he wandered into a small bookstore to escape the rain. It was not a place he usually visited. Most of the books he read were about optimization, performance, and success. This store was different. It smelled of old paper and silence. A thin book caught his attention. Its cover was plain, almost unimpressive. The title mentioned suffering, not in a dramatic way, but calmly, as if it were describing the weather. He opened it at random and read a single line. Life contains suffering not because something is wrong, but because we keep demanding that it feel different. He closed the book immediately, unsettled. Something about the sentence felt uncomfortably precise, like a mirror held too close. He didn't buy the book that day, but the line followed him home. For the first time, a different possibility appeared in his mind. Fragile, unfamiliar, and quietly radical. What if happiness was not something to be achieved? What if the chase itself was the problem? The Buddha's first insight was not about how to be happy. It was about seeing reality clearly. He observed that suffering arises not only from pain, but from attachment, the constant clinging to pleasant experiences and resistance to unpleasant ones. The endless demand that life delivers specific emotional outcomes. In other words, suffering is born the moment happiness becomes a requirement. This does not mean joy is wrong or pleasure should be avoided. It means that when happiness is treated as a destination, the present moment is never enough. And when the present moment is never enough, peace becomes impossible, no matter how successful life appears. The man began to notice something subtle in his daily life. Even during moments that were objectively good, his mind was elsewhere. When he was praised, part of him worried about maintaining the image. When he relaxed, another part calculated how long the relaxation could last before productivity must resume. When he felt happy, a quiet fear emerged, the fear of losing it. Happiness, once chased, became fragile. This was the promise the world kept selling. If you reach the right conditions, you will finally rest. But rest never came. Unknowingly, he had been trained to mistrust stillness, to equate worth with movement, to believe that happiness must be earned, sustained, defended. The Buddha offered a different starting point. He did not begin by promising happiness. He began by inviting people to look directly at their experience, without decoration, without escape. See suffering, he taught, not to be pessimistic, but to be honest, because only when the illusion is seen can it loosen its grip. Chapter 1 ends not with answers, but with a crack in the story the world tells. A quiet realization that perhaps happiness has never been absent, only obscured by the belief that it must be chased. And in that small crack, something new begins to breathe. At first, the chase did not feel like a problem. It felt noble, purposeful, even inspiring. The man woke each morning with a sense of direction. His calendar was full, his goals were clear, and his mind was trained to think in terms of progress. Every task completed was a small victory. Every milestone reached was proof that he was moving forward, not just in life, but toward happiness itself. Happiness, in his mind, was no longer an emotion. It was a destination. He didn't consciously decide this. It happened quietly, through repetition, through years of hearing the same narrative told in different voices. Set goals. Improve yourself. Don't settle. Keep pushing. The message was not cruel. It was practical, and it worked, at least on the surface. The problem was not effort. The problem was what effort had become attached to. Somewhere along the way, happiness stopped being something that arose naturally from moments of connection, rest, or simple presence. It became conditional, dependent, negotiated. I'll be happy when. I'll finally relax after. I deserve happiness once I achieve. Each sentence pushed happiness slightly into the future, just far enough to keep it out of reach. From a Buddhist perspective, this shift marks a critical turning point. The Buddha described this pattern as craving, not simply wanting something, but but believing that one's well-being depends on obtaining it. This kind of desire does not bring satisfaction. It creates tension, a subtle tightening of the mind around an imagined future state. Craving turns life into a problem to be solved. The man began to notice how often his thoughts revolved around optimization. Even during moments meant for enjoyment, his mind was busy measuring them. Was this vacation relaxing enough? Was this relationship fulfilling enough? Was this success meaningful enough? Joy, when it appeared, was quickly analyzed, evaluated, compared. Instead of being lived, happiness was being monitored. This constant monitoring created an unexpected side effect: anxiety. If happiness required certain conditions, then losing those conditions became a threat. Every good thing carried the shadow of its own disappearance. He didn't call it fear. He called it responsibility. But the body knew better. His shoulders were always tense. His sleep grew lighter. His thoughts rarely rested. The chase had accelerated. Neuroscience offers a clear explanation for this. When the brain associates happiness with achievement, it strengthens a feedback loop. Anticipation triggers dopamine, which fuels motivation and pursuit. But dopamine does not reward arrival. It rewards movement toward goal. This means that the brain feels most alive, not when happiness is experienced, but when it is expected. As a result, the present moment becomes strangely unsatisfying. It lacks the chemical intensity of anticipation. It feels flat compared to the imagined future. So the mind keeps moving. The man felt this without understanding it. He could be sitting in a beautiful cafe, sunlight spilling across the table. Yet his attention drifted to emails, plans, or the next thing on his list. Stillness made him restless. Silence felt unproductive. Without realizing it, he had trained his nervous system to equate motion with meaning. The Buddha observed this pattern more than 2,000 years ago. He noticed that people do not suffer only because they lack pleasant experiences, but because they cling to them. They demand that life deliver a particular feeling and resist everything that doesn't match that expectation. This resistance creates friction. The man's life was full of friction, though nothing was technically wrong. He was not in crisis. He was not unhappy in the dramatic sense, but he was never at ease. Happiness, once chased, began to resemble a horizon, always visible, never reachable. He noticed how quickly satisfaction dissolved. A promotion brought relief for a few weeks, then the old restlessness returned. A new purchase felt exciting until it became familiar. Even moments of love were tinged with anxiety. What if this changes? What if it ends? The chase demanded constant maintenance. In Buddhist language, this is the cycle of samsara, the endless wandering from desire to fulfillment to dissatisfaction, repeating without awareness. It is not a punishment. It is a habit of mind. The modern world unknowingly reinforces this habit. Everything moves fast. Everything improves. Everything competes for attention. There is always something better, newer, more impressive just ahead. The man compared himself constantly, even when he tried not to. Comparison had become automatic. Social media did not create this tendency. It magnified it. Every image of someone else's happiness became silent evidence that his own was incomplete. The chase intensified. He began to feel strangely disconnected from his own life, as if he were managing a project rather than inhabiting a human experience. Emotions became obstacles or tools. Sadness was something to fix. Boredom something to eliminate. Joy something to maximize. Nothing was allowed to simply be. This is where suffering deepens, not because pain increases, but because tolerance decreases. The mind loses its capacity to stay with what is unpleasant, uncertain, or ordinary. It becomes addicted to improvement. The Buddha called this tanha, thirst, not physical thirst, but a psychological hunger that cannot be quenched because it feeds on the belief that this moment is not enough. The man felt this thirst everywhere. In conversations where he half listened, already thinking ahead. In meals eaten quickly without tasting. In weekends filled with activity but lacking rest. He was chasing happiness so diligently that he had stopped noticing life. One night, exhausted and unable to sleep, he sat alone in his living room with the lights off. There was no dramatic breakdown, just fatigue, a deep, cellular tiredness that no vacation seemed to cure. A thought arose, uninvited and strangely calm. What if I stopped trying to be happy? The idea frightened him. It felt like failure, like giving up, like admitting defeat in a game everyone else seemed committed to winning. But another part of him felt relief. This moment, quiet, unresolved, honest, was the first pause in the chase. The Buddha taught that suffering does not end by obtaining the right conditions, but by understanding the nature of desire itself. Not suppressing it, not judging it, but seeing clearly how the chase operates. When happiness becomes a requirement, life becomes a negotiation. When happiness becomes a chase, peace becomes impossible. The man did not yet know how to stop. He only knew that running faster was no longer an option. The chase had promised fulfillment, but delivered exhaustion. And in that exhaustion, something important began to surface. Not despair, but curiosity. If chasing happiness creates suffering, what happens when the chase ends? That question lingered quietly, waiting for an answer that could not be found by effort alone. The story of awakening does not begin with happiness. This surprises many people. When the Buddha began to teach, he did not promise joy, success, or fulfillment. He did not offer techniques to feel better, nor did he describe enlightenment as a state of permanent bliss. Instead, his very first teaching began with something far less attractive and far more honest. Suffering exists, not as a mistake, not as a punishment, but as a fundamental feature of human experience. This observation was radical, especially then, and it remains uncomfortable now. The man did not know this teaching yet, but he was beginning to sense its truth in his own life. His exhaustion had softened something in him. The certainty that effort would fix everything had cracked. In its place, a quieter curiosity emerged, one that did not demand immediate answers. One evening, he returned to the small bookstore. This time, he bought the thin book he had avoided before. He read slowly, not because the words were difficult, but because they felt strangely close. Too close. The Buddha's first insight, the book explained, was not philosophical speculation. It came from direct observation. He looked at life as it is lived, not as it is advertised or idealized. People are born. They age. They get sick. They lose what they love. They cling to what brings pleasure. They resist what brings pain. And even in moments of comfort, there is an undercurrent of unease, the quiet knowledge that nothing stays. This is dukkha. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but the word is deeper and more subtle than that. It includes obvious pain, grief, illness, despair, but it also includes dissatisfaction, restlessness, and the sense that something is always slightly off. It is the feeling that life should be more stable than it is, more controllable, more satisfying. The man recognized this feeling immediately. It was there when he worried about losing what he had gained. It was there when happiness felt fragile. It was there when success failed to bring rest. What struck him most was that the Buddha did not frame dukkha as a personal failure. Suffering was not something wrong with him. It was not proof that he hadn't tried hard enough or optimized well enough. It was universal. This realization carried an unexpected relief. Modern culture tends to treat suffering as a problem to eliminate. If you're unhappy, something must be fixed. Your mindset, your habits, your circumstances. Pain becomes an error message. But the Buddha's observation was different. He did not say, life should not contain suffering. He said, notice that it does. And notice why. The second part of this observation cut even deeper. The Buddha saw that suffering does not arise randomly. It follows a pattern, and that pattern begins with attachment, the clinging to pleasant experiences and the resistance to unpleasant ones. The man paused often while reading, sensing how precisely this described his own mind. When things went well, he tightened around them, afraid to lose them. When things went poorly, he pushed against reality, demanding a change. Either way, there was tension, He began to see that much of his discomfort came not from what happened, but from his relationship to what happened. He was not simply experiencing life, he was negotiating with it. I'll accept this moment if it stays pleasant. I'll endure this difficulty if it leads to something better. Life, however, never signed that contract. Neuroscience offers a striking parallel to this ancient insight. The brain is constantly predicting the future, comparing reality to expectation. When reality does not match prediction, stress arises. The greater the gap between expectation and experience, the greater the discomfort. This is not a moral failing. It is a biological process. But when the mind becomes obsessed with controlling outcomes, especially emotional outcomes, it enters a state of chronic resistance. Reality is no longer allowed to be what it is. The man noticed how often he lived in this resistance. Even neutral moments felt incomplete. Silence was uncomfortable. Stillness felt like wasted time. He had trained himself to expect life to deliver stimulation, satisfaction, and progress at all times. When it didn't, something tightened inside him. The Buddha's first observation dismantles this expectation gently but firmly. It says, life includes change, uncertainty, and loss. Expecting otherwise creates suffering. This does not mean life is bleak. It means life is honest. For the first time, the man saw his constant pursuit of happiness in a new light. It was not just ambition, it was avoidance. A subtle refusal to sit with discomfort, uncertainty, or impermanence. Happiness had become a shield. By chasing happiness, he was unconsciously trying to escape dukkha. But the escape only deepened it. The more he demanded that life feel good, the more intolerable ordinary moments became. The Buddha did not condemn this behavior. He understood it. He saw that humans chase pleasure and security because they fear pain and instability. The chase is not wrong. It is understandable, but is misguided. The man closed the book one night and sat quietly, not meditating, not analyzing, just sitting. Thoughts arose, as they always did. Plans, worries, memories. But instead of following them, he watched them come and go. Something subtle shifted. The discomfort he usually tried to escape felt different when he didn't fight it. It didn't disappear, but it softened. It moved. It breathed. This was not happiness, but it was not suffering in the usual sense either. It was presence. The Buddha's first observation is often misunderstood as pessimistic, but in truth, it is profoundly compassionate. It removes the burden of pretending that life should be painless. It allows humans to stop blaming themselves for their discomfort. Suffering exists, not because you failed, but because you are alive. This understanding does not solve everything. It does not erase pain or guarantee peace, but it changes the direction of inquiry. Instead of asking, how can I make life always feel good? The question becomes, how can I relate wisely to what I feel? The man sensed that this question mattered more than any goal he had chased before. He was not awakened. He was not transformed, but he was no longer asleep in the same way. The chase had paused. The illusion had been named. And in that naming, something essential began to unfold. Not the promise of happiness, but the possibility of freedom. The man had always believed that his restlessness meant something was missing. A better goal, a smarter strategy, a more refined version of himself. But as he continued reading, observing, and quietly questioning his own experience, a new possibility emerged, one that did not blame him and did not demand improvement. What if the problem was not him at all? What if the mind itself was doing exactly what it was designed to do? This idea unsettled him at first. He had spent years trying to master his thoughts, discipline his emotions, and optimize his habits. The idea that restlessness might be biological, not personal, felt almost heretical. Yet the evidence was everywhere. Modern neuroscience paints a clear picture. The human brain did not evolve to make us happy. It evolved to keep us alive. Long before comfort, abundance, and leisure existed, survival depended on constant vigilance. The brain learned to scan for threats, seek resources, and push the organism forward. satisfaction, if it existed at all, was brief. Lingering contentment would have been dangerous. From this perspective, the brain's tendency to want more is not a flaw. It is a feature. The chemical most often associated with this process is dopamine. Popular culture treats dopamine as the happiness chemical, but this is misleading. Dopamine does not create happiness. It creates desire. It fuels anticipation, motivation, and pursuit. Dopamine spikes not when we receive a reward, but when we expect one. The man began to see his own life through this lens. The excitement he felt before promotion, the rush before purchase, the energy before a big milestone. These moments were intense, alive, almost intoxicating. But the moment the goal was reached, something strange happened. The intensity dropped. The mind moved on. Another target appeared. This cycle had nothing to do with gratitude or appreciation. It was neurological. The brain was wired to keep scanning the future, not resting in the present. And here lay the quiet tragedy of modern life. The environment had changed, but the brain had not. In a world where survival is no longer the primary concern, the same mechanisms that once protected us now push us into endless dissatisfaction. The brain keeps whispering, "Not yet, not enough, just a little more." The man recognized this whisper instantly. It had been guiding his decisions for years. Not maliciously, not consciously, but persistently. He noticed how his mind treated the present moment like a waiting room, something to endure until the real moment arrived. The vacation, the achievement, the next phase. The present was never enough because the brain was not designed to let it be enough. Buddhism had named this long before neuroscience could measure it. The Buddha observed that the mind is conditioned to seek pleasure and avoid pain. This conditioning creates tanha, thirst, a perpetual leaning forward into the future. The important insight is not that desire exists, but that we mistake desire for direction. The man had trusted every impulse to improve, upgrade, and optimize, believing they pointed toward happiness. But what if they were simply biological signals, useful for survival, but unreliable guides for well-being? This realization did not make desire disappear, but changed his relationship to it. He began to notice the moment desire arose, not just for big things, but for small ones. The urge to check his phone, the impulse to fill silence, the discomfort of stillness. Each urge carried the same message: move. Move your attention. Move your body. Move away from this moment. The brain interpreted stillness as stagnation, silence as absence, ordinary moments as insufficient. No wonder peace felt elusive. Neuroscience explains that when the brain is constantly oriented toward the future, the nervous system remains in a mild state of activation. Not full stress, but not rest either. This chronic low-level tension becomes the background of modern life. People call it busyness, or ambition, or drive, but the body feels it as fatigue. The man felt this fatigue deeply. It was not physical exhaustion, it was mental friction, a constant inner push that never turned off. He began to understand why happiness felt fragile, because it was being asked to do a job it was never meant to do. Happiness had become the mind's proof that everything was okay. Without it, the brain sounded the alarm. But the alarm was false. The brain was not responding to danger. It was responding to habit. The Buddha's insight was not to fight this habit, but to see it clearly, to recognize that craving arises automatically, and suffering arises when we believe the craving must be obeyed. The man experimented with this idea one afternoon. He sat quietly and noticed an urge to distract himself. The urge was strong, almost uncomfortable. Normally, he would have acted on it without thinking. This time, he didn't. He watched the urge. It rose. It peaked. It faded. Nothing terrible happened. This simple observation shook him more than any book or theory. It revealed something profound. Desire was not a command. It was a sensation. The brain could want more without needing to get more. This was the first glimpse of freedom. The problem was never that the brain wanted more. The problem was believing that happiness depended on satisfying that want. The modern world trains people to identify with every mental impulse. If you want something, you should pursue it. If you feel dissatisfied, something must be fixed. If you're restless, you need stimulation. But Buddhism, and increasingly neuroscience, suggests a different approach. Not suppression, not indulgence, but awareness. The man began to see that the brain's hunger was endless by design. No achievement could silence it permanently. No relationship could satisfy it forever. No pleasure could complete it. Chasing happiness through fulfillment was like trying to fill a bottomless cup. This was not depressing. It was clarifying. It meant he could stop expecting the impossible. The brain would continue to want more. That was not a problem. Suffering only arose when he believed that obeying the wanting would finally bring rest. For the first time, he felt compassion for himself. He had not failed at happiness. He had been following instructions written into his nervous system. The Buddha never asked people to destroy desire. He asked them to understand it, to see how it works, to stop confusing movement with meaning. The man sensed that this understanding was changing something fundamental. The chase was losing its authority, not because desire disappeared, but because its promise was no longer believed. The brain could want more, but he did not have to run. The man had spent most of his life assuming that pleasure and peace were variations of the same thing. If something felt good, it must be good for him. If it brought excitement, relief, or satisfaction, it must be moving him closer to happiness. No one had ever told him otherwise. In fact, the world constantly reinforced this belief. Pleasure was celebrated, advertised, optimized. Entire industries existed to make it faster, stronger, more intense, more accessible. From entertainment to food, from relationships to achievement, pleasure was presented as the currency of a good life. Peace, on the other hand, was vague, abstract, often misunderstood as passivity or weakness. It did not photograph well. It did not trend. So he had learned to chase pleasure, believing peace would follow. It never did. As he began to observe his own mind more closely, a quiet distinction emerged, one that changed everything. Pleasure excited him. Peace settled him. Pleasure lifted him upward. Peace allowed him to rest. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Pleasure arrived with a spike, an increase in energy, focus, and emotional intensity. His thoughts became sharper, faster. His body leaned forward. There was movement, momentum, and anticipation. Peace, by contrast, arrived without drama. It did not demand attention. It did not accelerate thought. It felt like exhaling after holding his breath for too long. Pleasure wanted more. Peace wanted nothing. Neuroscience explains this difference with striking clarity. Pleasure is closely tied to the brain's reward system, particularly dopamine. As he had learned, dopamine is not about contentment. It is about pursuit. It heightens focus, narrows attention, and pushes the mind toward acquisition. Peace, however, is associated with a different physiological state altogether. It emerges when the nervous system shifts out of threat and pursuit mode. Heart rate slows, muscles soften, breathing deepens. The brain reduces its constant scanning of the future. Peace is not a chemical high. It is a state of regulation. The man realized that much of what he had called happiness was actually stimulation. He had mistaken intensity for fulfillment. When life felt flat or quiet, he assumed something was wrong. So he added more. More plans, more goals, more distractions. But stimulation, by its nature, demands recovery. The nervous system cannot remain activated indefinitely without cost. Over time, pleasure without peace becomes exhausting. This explains something he had never been able to articulate. Even after enjoyable experiences, he often felt depleted. Vacations required recovery. Success brought pressure. Pleasure came with a price. The Buddha described this long before modern science had the language for it. He observed that pleasure is impermanent and unreliable, not because it is bad, but because it cannot satisfy the deeper longing of the mind. Pleasure fades. Peace remains when it is allowed. The problem, the Buddha taught, is not pleasure itself, but attachment to pleasure. The moment the mind insists that pleasure must continue, must return, must define well-being, suffering begins. The man saw this clearly now. When pleasure ended, he felt a subtle drop, not into pain, but into disappointment. A sense that something had been taken away, that life had regressed. This disappointment was not caused by the absence of pleasure. It was caused by expectation. Peace, by contrast, did not depend on continuity. It did not collapse when conditions changed. It could coexist with silence, uncertainty, even sadness. This was difficult for him to accept at first. He had always believed that peace was the result of fixing everything, solving problems, securing outcomes, achieving stability. But peace, he was discovering, did not come from control. It came from non-resistance. One evening, instead of filling his time with noise, he sat quietly and allowed boredom to arise, not as a problem to solve, but as an experience to feel. At first, it was uncomfortable. His mind searched for stimulation automatically. Thoughts bounced restlessly. His body shifted. Then something unexpected happened. The discomfort softened. The urge passed. And beneath it, there was a gentle stillness. Not exciting, not dull, simply present. This was peace. It did not announce itself. It did not make promises. It did not feel like an achievement, but it felt honest. The Buddha taught that peace arises when craving subsides, not permanently, but moment by moment. When the mind stops demanding that experience conform to its preferences, a natural ease emerges. This ease is not the opposite of pain. It is the absence of struggle with pain. The man began to notice how often he struggled with neutral moments. Waiting in line, sitting in traffic, being alone with his thoughts. These moments felt intolerable because they offered no pleasure. But when he stopped resisting them, they revealed something else, a quiet spaciousness that did not need to be filled. Modern culture rarely points people toward this discovery. It teaches them to upgrade moments, not inhabit them, to escape discomfort, not understand it, to chase pleasure, not cultivate peace. As a result, many people live highly stimulated lives with very little rest. The man recognized himself in this pattern. He had optimized everything except his relationship to stillness. Pleasure had trained his attention outward, toward objects, achievements, experiences. Peace trained his attention inward, toward awareness itself. This did not mean withdrawing from life. It meant engaging without clinging. The Buddha did not reject pleasure. He simply warned against mistaking it for refuge. Pleasure is a guest. Peace is a home. The man understood now why the chase had failed him. He had been running after experiences, believing they would deliver a state that could only arise when running stopped. This realization did not make pleasure disappear. He still enjoyed success, comfort, connection. But something had shifted. He no longer expected these things to save him. And without that expectation, they became lighter, freer, less urgent. Peace, he was learning, was not something to be added to life. It was what remained when a constant demand for more fell silent. For the first time, he sensed that happiness might not be about feeling better, but about needing less. And in that understanding, the noise of the chase softened, making space for something quieter, deeper, and far more sustainable. There was a moment, quiet and unremarkable, when a man finally understood that his problem was not unhappiness. It was hunger, not the kind that growls in the stomach, but a deeper, more insistent craving that lived in the mind. A hunger that no meal, no achievement, no affection could ever fully satisfy. Buddhism had a word for this hunger, tanha, often translated simply as desire or craving. Tanha is more specific than wanting something pleasant. It is the belief that this thing, once obtained, will finally make me okay. It is desire fused with identity, need fused with self-worth. The man realized that most of his life had been organized around this belief. If I get there, I'll be enough. If I have this, I'll be secure. If I feel happy, I'll be safe. Tanha was not loud. It did not shout. It whispered through perfectly reasonable thoughts. It disguised itself as motivation, ambition, even self-care. But beneath its many forms, it carried the same message. What is here is not enough. The Buddha identified tanha as the origin of suffering, not because desire itself is evil, but because craving distorts perception. It makes the present moment feel deficient by default. It turns life into a problem that must be solved before peace is allowed. The man began to notice how automatically this hunger arose. It appeared when he felt bored, anxious, lonely, or uncertain. It promised relief through action, through distraction, through improvement. And each time he followed it, the relief was brief. Like drinking salt water, the thirst returned stronger than before. Neuroscience described the same phenomenon in different language. The brain's reward system is built on reinforcement. When a behavior brings relief or pleasure, the brain strengthens the urge to repeat it. Over time, this creates habit loops. But tanha is not satisfied by repetition. It is intensified by it. The more the man chased relief, the more sensitive his mind became to discomfort. Small frustrations felt intolerable. Silence felt empty. Ordinary moments felt meaningless. His capacity to simply be had eroded. The Buddha observed this pattern with extraordinary clarity. He saw that craving takes three primary forms: craving for pleasure, craving for becoming something, craving for non-existence, for escape. The man recognized all three in himself. He craved pleasurable experiences to lift him out of dullness. He craved becoming more successful, more respected, more complete. And at times, he craved disappearance, numbing himself through distraction, sleep, or noise. Each craving was an attempt to escape discomfort. But the escape never lasted. Tanha was endless because it was rooted in misunderstanding. It assumed that discomfort was unacceptable, and that peace could only arrive once discomfort was eliminated. The Buddha taught the opposite. Discomfort is not the enemy. Resistance is. The man tested this insight in small ways. When irritation arose, he noticed it instead of fixing it. When restlessness appeared, he allowed it instead of fleeing from it. At first, this felt unnatural. His mind protested. Do something, it insisted. Change this. But slowly, something surprising happened. The discomfort moved. It did not grow. It did not consume him. It rose, shifted, and faded like a wave breaking on its own. What he had feared was not the discomfort itself, but the idea that it would last forever. Tanha had convinced him that unpleasant states were emergencies, that they required immediate action, that something had gone wrong. But nothing had gone wrong. The Buddha called this realization seeing clearly, not seeing the world as pleasant or unpleasant, but seeing the nature of experience itself, impermanent, changing, uncontrollable. Craving thrives on the illusion of permanence. It promises lasting satisfaction from temporary things. It demands stability from a reality defined by change. The man began to see how deeply this illusion had shaped his life. He had tried to build permanent happiness on impermanent conditions. He had demanded certainty from an uncertain world. No wonder he was tired. Modern society magnifies tanha relentlessly. It teaches people to identify with their desires, to define themselves by what they want, what they lack, what they are becoming. You are your goals. You are your potential. You are your next achievement. But the Buddha offered a radically different view. You are not your craving. You are the awareness that notices it. This distinction changed everything. The man did not need to destroy desire. He needed to stop obeying it blindly. He needed to see that craving was a mental event, not a truth, not a command. As this understanding deepened, the hunger began to lose its urgency. Desire still arose, but it no longer dictated his worth or his peace. He could want without needing. This was subtle but profound. Without tanha running the show, the present moment no longer felt like a mistake. It did not need to be upgraded or escaped. It could be met as it was. This did not make life dull. It made it real. The Buddha taught that when craving ceases, not permanently, but moment by moment, suffering ceases with it. Not because pain disappears, but because the struggle against pain ends. The man felt this truth directly. In moments when he did not chase happiness, something unexpected appeared. Ease. Not excitement, not pleasure. Ease. A quiet sense that nothing needed to be added or removed for this moment to be complete. This was not the happiness he had been chasing. It was something deeper. Tanha had promised fulfillment through accumulation, but fulfillment arrived through release. The endless hunger had not been asking for more life. It had been asking for permission to stop running. And for the first time, the man understood that peace was not found at the end of desire, but in seeing through it. The hunger had shaped his life. Understanding it would set him free. The man began to notice a strange contradiction. The more seriously he took the pursuit of happiness, the more fragile his inner life became. The harder he worked to feel good, the less tolerant he was of feeling anything else. Small disappointments felt heavier. Minor anxieties lingered longer. Ordinary days felt strangely inadequate, as if they were failing some invisible test. He had followed the instructions faithfully. He had read the books, listened to the advice, and absorbed the message repeated everywhere in modern culture. You should be happy. You deserve to be happy. If you're not happy, something must be wrong. At first, this message sounded compassionate, empowering even, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, it turned into pressure. If happiness was the goal, then every moment became a measurement. If happiness was the standard, then every feeling was evaluated. If happiness was expected, then unhappiness became a personal failure. The man realized that he was no longer just experiencing emotions. He was judging them. When sadness appeared, he wondered how quickly it would pass. When anxiety arose, he questioned why it was still there. When boredom surfaced, he searched for ways to eliminate it. There was no room for emotional neutrality, let alone difficulty. Ironically, this obsession with happiness made him less happy. Psychology and neuroscience had a name for this phenomenon, the happiness paradox. Studies showed that people who place a high value on happiness tend to experience more anxiety and depression, not less. The reason was subtle but powerful. When happiness becomes a goal, it turns into a standard that reality often fails to meet. And when reality fails, disappointment follows. The man felt this disappointment constantly, though he rarely acknowledged it. He compared his internal world to an imagined ideal, a version of himself who was calm, confident, fulfilled, and emotionally stable at all times. He never measured up. The Buddha had observed this paradox long before scientific studies confirmed it. He saw that suffering increases not because life becomes more painful, but because the mind becomes less accepting. When happiness is demanded, discomfort is rejected. When discomfort is rejected, suffering multiplies. This is the hidden cost of chasing happiness. The man noticed how often his mind leaned into the future, hoping for relief. Even on good days, there was an underlying tension. Will this last? Even in moments of joy, there was a quiet fear of loss. Happiness, once pursued, became unstable. Neuroscience explained why. The brain, when focused on achieving a particular emotional state, becomes hypervigilant. It monitors experience constantly, checking whether reality matches expectation. This monitoring activates stress circuits, even in pleasant situations. The result is a subtle but chronic dissatisfaction. The man saw this clearly in himself. He could be relaxed and tense at the same time, enjoying a moment while simultaneously worrying about its impermanence. Happiness was no longer simple. It was conditional. The Buddha described this as dukkha within pleasure. Even pleasant experiences carry suffering when they are clung to. Not because pleasure is harmful, but because clinging introduces fear. Fear of loss, fear of change, fear of falling short. Modern society intensifies this fear. Social media, advertising, and self-improvement culture present happiness as a visible achievement. something others seem to have figured out, something that can be displayed, measured, and compared. The man compared himself constantly, even when he tried not to. Other people's joy became evidence of his own insufficiency. Their smiles felt like silent accusations. Why don't you feel like that? This comparison had a corrosive effect. It made his private struggles feel abnormal. It convinced him that suffering was a sign of failure rather than a natural part of being human. The Buddha's teaching offered a radically different perspective. Suffering is not a malfunction. It is not proof that something has gone wrong. It is the natural result of a mind that resists reality. This resistance often hides behind good intentions. Wanting to be happy seems harmless, even wise. But when happiness becomes compulsory, it turns against us. The man remembered a moment when he had been deeply tired, emotionally drained, and quietly sad. Instead of allowing that sadness, he had immediately tried to fix it through distraction, motivation, or forced positivity. The sadness did not disappear. It intensified. Only later did he realize why. He had added a second layer of suffering on top of the first. The belief that sadness was unacceptable. The Buddha taught that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Pain is the raw experience, loss, disappointment, uncertainty. Suffering is the mental resistance layered on top. The man began to understand how much of his suffering was self-created, not intentionally, but habitually. Every time he thought, "I shouldn't feel this way," suffering deepened. Every time he asked, "How do I get rid of this?" suffering persisted. Every time he demanded happiness, dissatisfaction followed. The pursuit of happiness had become a form of self-rejection. He was constantly telling himself that who he was, right now, was not enough. This realization was painful, but also liberating. If the chase itself was creating suffering, then perhaps relief did not require achieving more, but demanding less. Perhaps peace was not found by feeling better, but by making room for what was already present. The Buddha never taught people to stop feeling joy. He taught them to stop clinging to it. He never taught people to avoid happiness. He taught them not to build their identity around it. Happiness, he understood, is a byproduct, not a command. The man noticed moments when he was not trying to be happy. Walking without headphones, sitting without purpose, letting a feeling pass without labeling it. In those moments, something unexpected happened. The tension eased. Not dramatically, not permanently, but noticeably. The irony was clear now. The less he tried to manage his emotional state, the more balanced it became. The less he demanded happiness, the more space there was for contentment to arise naturally. The chase had been loud. Relief was quiet. Modern culture rarely acknowledges this truth. It tells people to pursue happiness aggressively, without warning them of the cost. It treats negative emotions as enemies rather than teachers. But the Buddha offered a different path. Not toward constant happiness, but toward freedom from the need for it. The man understood now why trying harder had made things worse. He had been swimming against the current of his own mind, exhausting himself in the process. Perhaps the problem was never that happiness was missing. Perhaps the problem was that he kept insisting it should be there. And in that insight, something softened. Not into happiness, but into acceptance. For the first time, he felt that life did not need to be corrected. It only needed to be met. The man did not remember when comparison became automatic. It had not arrived as a conscious decision. It slipped into his life quietly, disguised as curiosity, inspiration, even connection. A glance at other people's lives, a quick scroll, a moment of interest that turned into a habit. At first, it seemed harmless. He told himself he was just staying informed, keeping up, learning from others who were doing well. But over time, something subtle changed. His mind began to measure itself constantly against images, stories, achievements, and emotional performances that were never meant to be standards. He was no longer just living his life. He was evaluating it. The Buddha taught that comparison is a form of suffering because it anchors identity to conditions that are unstable and incomplete. But in the modern digital world, comparison has taken on an unprecedented intensity. Never before had human beings been exposed to so many curated versions of other people's lives, edited, filtered, and selectively presented. The mind, however, did not evolve to understand curation. It interpreted what it saw as reality. The man's brain responded instinctively. They are happier. They are further ahead. They figured something out that I haven't. These thoughts did not always feel hostile. Sometimes they felt motivational. But beneath both motivation and envy lay the same assumption. My current life is not enough. Neuroscience explains why digital comparison is so powerful. The brain is wired to learn through social reference. In small communities, comparing oneself to others helped establish norms, cooperation, and survival strategies. But the digital environment overwhelms this mechanism. Instead of comparing himself to a few familiar people, the man was now comparing himself to thousands of carefully selected highlights. His brain did not register that these images represented fragments, not wholes. It simply registered deficiency. Each comparison triggered a small stress response. Not dramatic, just enough to create tension. Over time, these micro-stresses accumulated, shaping his baseline emotional state. He felt perpetually behind. Even when he was doing well, there was always someone doing better. Even when he felt content, a single image could puncture that contentment, replacing it with doubt. The Buddha described this pattern as upadana, clinging. Clinging not just to pleasure, but to identity. The need to be seen a certain way. The need to measure up. In the digital world, identity becomes performative. Happiness is displayed. Success is announced. Suffering is often hidden or aestheticized. The man began to realize that he was comparing his inner life, messy, uncertain, private, to other people's outer projections. It was an unfair comparison, and yet the mind could not stop doing it. He noticed how often his emotional state shifted after scrolling. A quiet dissatisfaction lingered, even if he couldn't pinpoint its source. He felt restless, ungrounded, vaguely inadequate. This was not because others were doing well. It was because comparison had trained his mind to look away from direct experience and toward imagined standards. The Buddha taught that suffering intensifies when the mind leaves the present moment in search of validation or reassurance. Comparison does exactly that. It pulls attention outward and upward, away from what is toward what should be. The man saw how comparison distorted not only his sense of success, but his sense of happiness. He had absorbed an unspoken rule. Happiness should look a certain way. It should be visible, exciting, constant. Quiet contentment did not count. Moments of peace felt insufficient because they were not shareable. Ordinary joy felt small compared to the dramatic happiness he saw online. Comparison had hijacked his ability to trust his own experience. Neuroscience confirmed this. When people engage in frequent social comparison, activity increases in brain regions associated with self-evaluation and threat detection. The mind becomes vigilant, scanning for evidence of inferiority or exclusion. This vigilance erodes peace. The man began to see how comparison fed the chase. Each image of someone else's happiness became a new goalpost, a new definition of what he was supposed to feel, achieve, or become. Happiness was no longer an inner state. It was a performance benchmark. The Buddha's teachings cut through this illusion with startling simplicity. He taught that liberation begins when one stops measuring the self. When one stops asking, "How do I compare?" and starts asking, "What is happening right now?" This shift is subtle but transformative. The man experimented with it. When comparison arose, he did not fight it. He noticed it. He felt the contraction it created in his body, the tightening in the chest, the quickening of thought. He asked himself a different question. What am I actually experiencing in this moment? Often, the answer surprised him. He was sitting safely, breathing, not lacking anything essential. The sense of deficiency came not from reality, but from interpretation. Comparison had convinced him that happiness existed elsewhere, in someone else's life, timeline, or circumstances. But the Buddha taught that happiness is never found through comparison because comparison is rooted in separation. It divides experience into better and worse, higher and lower, ahead and behind. Peace, by contrast, arises from wholeness. The man noticed that when he disengaged from comparison, even briefly, his mind softened, not into excitement, but into ease. There was less urgency, less pressure to prove something. He realized that much of his suffering had not come from what he lacked, but from what he believed he should have. The digital world had amplified this belief relentlessly. It had turned happiness into a spectacle, a competition, a brand. The Buddha would have recognized this instantly, not as a new problem, but as an intensified version of an old one. Humans have always compared themselves. The difference now was scale and speed. Comparison no longer paused. The man made a small but meaningful change. He reduced his exposure, not as a rejection of technology, but as an act of care. More importantly, he changed how he related to what he saw. Instead of asking, "Why don't I have that?" he asked, "What does this stir in me?" This question returned him to himself. The Buddha taught that freedom is not found by rearranging external conditions, but by understanding internal reactions. Comparison loses its power when it is seen clearly. The man began to trust his own experience again, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was real. Happiness, he was learning, does not need witnesses. It does not need validation. It does not need to be measured against anyone else's life. In stepping out of comparison, he did not become happier in the dramatic sense, but something deeper emerged. He became more at ease in his own mind. And for the first time, that felt like enough. For most of his life, the man had believed a quiet but powerful assumption. If I am suffering, something has gone wrong. This belief shaped how he treated himself in moments of difficulty. Sadness became something to fix. Anxiety became something to eliminate. Confusion became evidence that he was falling behind. He did not see this belief as harsh. It felt logical. After all, modern culture rarely presents suffering as anything other than a problem. Pain is framed as a defect, emotional struggle as inefficiency, inner turbulence as weakness. Even compassion, when offered, often carries the same underlying message. You shouldn't have to feel this way. The man had absorbed this message deeply. When suffering appeared, he turned against himself. He asked what he had done wrong, what mindset he needed to change, what habit he needed to optimize. He treated suffering like a personal error in an otherwise correct system. But as his understanding of the Buddha's teachings deepened, this assumption began to unravel. The Buddha did not describe suffering as failure. He described it as truth. The first noble truth was not a condemnation. It was an invitation to honesty. Life includes suffering, not occasionally, not accidentally, but inevitably. Birth, aging, illness, separation, uncertainty. Even pleasure carries the seed of loss. This was not pessimism. It was realism without denial. The man felt a strange relief as this understanding settled in. For the first time, his pain did not feel like a verdict on his worth. It felt like part of the human condition. He realized how much of his suffering had been amplified by shame. Not the original pain itself, but the belief that he should not be experiencing it, that others were handling life better, that he was failing some invisible test of resilience or positivity. The Buddha saw this clearly. He understood that when suffering is rejected, it deepens. When pain is layered with judgment, it multiplies. Modern neuroscience supports this insight. Studies show that emotional pain becomes more intense when individuals judge themselves for feeling it. The brain activates additional stress responses, interpreting self-criticism as threat. In other words, telling yourself you shouldn't suffer creates more suffering. The man recognized this pattern instantly. In moments of sadness, his mind would ask, "Why am I still feeling this?" In moments of anxiety, it would demand, "Shouldn't I be past this by now?" These questions did not bring clarity. They brought pressure. He had been fighting a war against his own experience. The Buddha offered a radical alternative: stop fighting. Not in the sense of resignation, but in the sense of acceptance. Acceptance does not mean liking suffering. It means allowing it to exist without resistance. The man tested this idea cautiously. One evening, feeling heavy and unmotivated, he resisted the urge to fix himself. He did not distract himself. He did not reframe the feeling. He simply acknowledged it. This is suffering. Something softened. The suffering did not vanish, but it lost its sharp edge. Without judgment, it became more manageable, less personal, less overwhelming. This was a turning point. He realized that suffering had always been trying to communicate something, not about failure, but about reality. It was pointing to attachment, expectation, resistance. The Buddha taught that suffering is a teacher, not an enemy. It reveals where the mind is clinging. It highlights the gap between how things are and how we demand they be. When suffering is treated as failure, its message is ignored. When it is treated as information, wisdom becomes possible. The man began to reframe his relationship with discomfort. Instead of asking how to eliminate it, he asked what it was revealing. Anxiety revealed a desire for control. Sadness revealed attachment. Restlessness revealed resistance to stillness. These insights did not require blame. They required attention. The modern world rarely allows this kind of attention. It urges people to move on quickly, to stay productive, to maintain appearances. Suffering becomes something to hide, medicate, or outperform. But the Buddha taught that ignoring suffering does not make it disappear. It drives it underground, where it shapes behavior unconsciously. The man saw how much of his life had been driven by unacknowledged pain. His ambition, his perfectionism, his need for approval, all attempts to outrun discomfort. Yet the discomfort had always followed. Now, instead of running, he paused. He allowed himself to be human. This was not indulgence. It was honesty. The Buddha emphasized that suffering is universal, not as a philosophical idea, but as a lived reality. No amount of success, intelligence, or discipline exempts anyone from it. Understanding this dissolves isolation. The man realized that much of his pain had been lonely because he believed it was abnormal. He thought others had figured something out that he had missed. But suffering was not evidence of inferiority. It was evidence of existence. This realization changed how he related to others as well. He saw their confidence differently, not as proof of immunity, but as presentation. He saw their struggles with more compassion, not because he was superior, but because he recognized himself. The Buddha taught that compassion begins with understanding shared suffering, not pity, but recognition. As the man's resistance softened, he noticed a paradox. By allowing suffering, he experienced less of it. By not demanding happiness, moments of ease appeared naturally. Not dramatic joy, just steadiness. He no longer saw difficult days as setbacks. They were part of the path, not deviations from it. The chase for happiness had taught him to evaluate life in terms of success and failure. The Buddha's teaching taught him to see life in terms of awareness and understanding. Suffering was no longer a verdict. It was a signal pointing toward freedom. Not freedom from pain, but freedom from the war against it. The man understood now that awakening did not mean eliminating suffering. It meant ending the belief that suffering should not exist. And in that understanding, a deep, quiet strength emerged. Not the strength of control, but the strength of acceptance. For the first time, he felt that nothing was wrong with him. He was simply alive, and that was enough. The moment did not arrive with clarity or certainty. There was no dramatic decision, no vow to change, no sudden peace descending from the sky. The man simply stopped, not because he had found something better to chase, but because chasing had exhausted him. His mind, once driven by urgency and expectation, had reached a quiet limit. The endless effort to feel different, to be happier, calmer, more fulfilled, had lost its momentum. For the first time in years, he did not know what came next. And strangely, that not knowing felt lighter than certainty ever had. Stopping did not mean giving up on life. It meant giving up the belief that life needed to be outrun. It meant allowing the present moment to catch up with him. At first, this felt unsettling. When the chase ends, silence appears. And silence reveals everything that movement was covering up. Unresolved emotions surfaced. Old disappointments, lingering grief, a dull ache of loneliness he had learned to ignore. Without goals to lean into, the mind turned inward. This was uncomfortable, but it was also honest. The Buddha taught that most people spend their lives running, not always physically, but psychologically, running from pain, from uncertainty, from impermanence, chasing pleasure, meaning, and reassurance in the hope that they will provide refuge. Stopping the chase removes that refuge. The man noticed how instinctively his mind searched for something to do, something to fix, something to improve. The urge was strong, almost reflexive, but this time he did not obey it. He sat with the discomfort. At first, the experience felt raw. His thoughts were loud, his body restless. Emotions came and went without explanation. There was no familiar sense of progress. Yet beneath the noise, something unexpected was happening. The tension that had always accompanied effort began to soften. He noticed how much energy he had spent trying to control his inner state, monitoring feelings, adjusting behavior, evaluating whether he was okay. Stopping the chase did not immediately make him feel good, but it made him feel real. Neuroscience offers insight into this shift. When the brain is no longer oriented toward constant goal pursuit, the nervous system gradually exits its chronic state of activation. The fight or flight response quiets. The body begins to regulate itself. This does not happen instantly. Years of conditioning do not dissolve overnight, but the direction changes. The man felt this change subtly. His breath deepened. His thoughts slowed. His body felt less armored. For the first time, he noticed how often he had been bracing for the future. Without the chase, the future lost its grip. The Buddha described this moment not as enlightenment, but as turning toward experience instead of away from it, turning toward uncertainty instead of escaping into plans. This turning requires courage, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet willingness to stay. The man began to understand why so few people stop running. When the chase ends, there is no guarantee of happiness. There is only presence, and presence demands honesty. He noticed how the mind tried to bargain. If I stop chasing, will I fall behind? If I stop striving, will my life lose meaning? If I stop wanting more, will I become less? These fears were not irrational. They were learned. The modern world equates motion with value. To stop is to risk irrelevance. To rest is to risk stagnation. But the Buddha taught that stopping is not stagnation. It is clarity. When the mind stops running, it begins to see. The man noticed how his experiences changed when he was not rushing toward the next moment. Conversations felt fuller. Sounds felt sharper. Even mundane activities carried a quiet richness. Nothing extraordinary had changed. His attention had. He realized how rarely he had actually been present for his own life. Even moments he had labeled as happy were often partially missed because his mind was already moving ahead. Stopping the chase allowed moments to land. This did not eliminate pain. Difficult emotions still arose. Uncertainty remained. The difference was that he no longer treated these experiences as obstacles. They were simply part of the landscape. The Buddha taught that suffering intensifies when we resist what is. When resistance drops, pain becomes workable. It flows instead of stagnating. The man felt this directly. Emotions that once lingered now moved more freely. He cried without collapsing, felt anxious without spiraling, felt bored without panicking. This was not emotional mastery. It was emotional permission. One afternoon, he sat alone without distraction, watching light shift across the room. The moment was ordinary. Nothing was achieved. Nothing was resolved. Yet there was a gentle sense of completeness. This surprised him. He had spent years believing that fulfillment came from accumulation, from adding more experiences, more success, more happiness. But here was a moment with nothing added and nothing missing. The Buddha described this as contentment without conditions. Not because conditions are perfect, but because the demand for perfection has relaxed. The man realized that the chase had not only exhausted him, it had blinded him. By constantly reaching for something else, he had overlooked what was already present. Stopping did not give him answers. It gave him space. In that space, a different kind of intelligence emerged. Not the strategic intelligence of planning, but the intuitive intelligence of awareness. He began to sense what was appropriate without forcing it. Sometimes action arose naturally. Other times, stillness felt right. Life no longer felt like a project. It felt like a process. The Buddha never taught people to withdraw from life. He taught them to withdraw from compulsion, to act without clinging, to engage without grasping. Stopping the chase did not make the man passive. It made him responsive. He could move when movement was needed and rest when rest was needed. Not because a rule dictated it, but because he was listening. The most surprising discovery was this. When he stopped running toward happiness, happiness occasionally appeared on its own. Not as excitement, not as triumph, but as ease. Ease in breathing, ease in being, ease in not needing this moment to be anything other than what it was. This ease could not be chased. It arrived only when chasing stopped. The man understood now why the Buddha emphasized letting go rather than achieving. Letting go does not create something new. It reveals what effort was obscuring. Stopping the chase did not solve life, but it ended the war against it. And in that ending, something profound unfolded. Not a promise of permanent happiness, but a deep trust that whatever arose could be met. For the first time, the man was not running toward a better life. He was living the one already here. For most of his life, the man had lived inside a single question. How do I make this better? Every experience passed through that filter. If something felt good, he wondered how to extend it. If something felt unpleasant, he searched for a way out. His attention was always leaning forward, slightly ahead of the present moment, trying to shape what came next. This orientation felt normal, responsible even. After all, progress depended on improvement. But as the chase quieted, another question emerged, soft, unfamiliar, and strangely liberating. What is actually happening right now? This question did not demand change. It invited observation. The shift from wanting to seeing was subtle, but profound. Wanting pulled his attention into the future. Seeing anchored it in the present. Wanting evaluated experience. Seeing allowed it. The Buddha called this capacity right view, not as a belief system, but as a way of perceiving reality without distortion. Right view begins with recognizing that experience is constantly changing, and that clinging to any particular state creates suffering. The man began to practice this shift deliberately. When desire arose, he did not suppress it. He noticed it. When aversion appeared, he did not argue with it. He observed its texture. This was not analysis. It was awareness. Neuroscience describes this process as metacognition, the ability to observe one's own mental activity without being swept away by it. When this capacity strengthens, the brain's reactive circuits quiet and reflective circuits engage. In simpler terms, seeing interrupts automatic doing. The man experienced this interruption again and again. A familiar urge would arise, to check his phone, to plan, to escape boredom. Instead of acting, he paused and looked. The urge lost some of its authority. Not because it disappeared, but because it was no longer believed unquestioningly. This was the essence of mindfulness, not concentration, not control, but clear seeing. The Buddha taught mindfulness as sati, which means remembering to be aware. Remembering to return to direct experience rather than mental commentary. The man noticed how much of his life had been lived in commentary, narrating, judging, comparing. Rarely resting in raw experience. Seeing clearly felt different. It was quieter, less dramatic, but more real. He noticed the sensation of breathing, not as a technique, but as a fact. The feeling of the body, sitting. The sounds in the room. Thoughts rising and falling like weather. Nothing needed to be improved. This was difficult at first. His mind protested. Isn't this passive? Isn't this a waste of time? But as he stayed, something shifted. Beneath want softened. He realized that wanting had been his way of avoiding discomfort. It kept him busy, distracted, oriented toward hope. Seeing, by contrast, required him to stay with what was present, even when it was neutral, boring, or uncertain. This was challenging, but it was also freeing. The Buddha taught that suffering persists not because we feel desire or aversion, but because we do not see them clearly. When mental states are observed without identification, they lose their grip. The man tested this insight in moments of emotional difficulty. When anxiety arose, he felt it in his body instead of explaining it. Tightness in the chest, quicken breath, restless energy. By feeling it directly, without labeling it as a problem, the anxiety shifted. It became sensation rather than story. This distinction mattered. Stories prolong suffering. Sensations pass. The man began to see how much of his suffering had been fueled by narrative. This shouldn't be happening. I need to fix this. What does this say about me? Seeing interrupted these narratives. It did not provide answers. It provided space. Neuroscience confirms that when attention is directed to present moment sensory experience, activity decreases in brain regions associated with self-referential thinking. The sense of a fixed, evaluated me temporarily dissolves. The man felt this dissolution gently, not as loss, but as relief. He did not need to defend or improve an identity in that moment. He was simply aware. The Buddha described this as non-identification, the understanding that thoughts, emotions, and desires are events, not possessions. They arise and pass. They do not define the self. This insight was destabilizing at first. If he was not his desires, then who was he? But the question itself began to lose urgency. Seeing clearly did not require an answer. It required presence. The man noticed how differently he responded to life when he was seeing rather than wanting. Conversations felt less performative. Listening replaced planning. Action arose naturally instead of being forced. He still had goals, still made decisions, but the underlying tension had changed. He was no longer trying to extract happiness from outcomes. He was engaging with reality as it unfolded. This did not make life perfect. Challenges remained. Uncertainty persisted. But the relationship to these experiences had transformed. The Buddha taught that wisdom is not accumulation of knowledge, but the direct seeing of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and non-self. These truths are not depressing when seen clearly. They are liberating. The man saw impermanence everywhere, in sensations, moods, thoughts. Nothing stayed long enough to be clung to. This realization softened his grip. If nothing lasts, why demand permanence? If nothing is stable, why build identity on it? Seeing clearly loosened the need to secure happiness. Happiness, when it appeared, was enjoyed without fear. When it left, it was not mourned as a failure. The man realized that clarity did not remove desire. It contextualized it. Desire became one movement among many, not the driver of his life. This was the shift from craving to wisdom, from chasing to seeing, from demanding happiness to allowing experience. The Buddha never promised that seeing clearly would make life pleasant. He promised that it would make life true. And in truth, the man discovered something unexpected. When he stopped asking life to deliver happiness, life began to offer something better. Freedom from the need to ask it all. At first, acceptance sounded passive to the man, like giving up, like settling for less. The word carried the weight of resignation, as if accepting life meant lowering expectations or abandoning hope. He resisted it instinctively. He had been trained to improve, to optimize, to fix. Acceptance felt like the opposite of progress. It seemed to imply that nothing could change, that effort no longer mattered. But as his understanding deepened, he began to see that acceptance was not the end of effort. It was the end of resistance. This distinction changed everything. The Buddha never taught people to accept suffering as fate. He taught them to stop fighting reality. Not because reality is always pleasant, but because fighting what already exists creates unnecessary pain. Modern neuroscience revealed the same truth through a different lens. The human nervous system operates in two broad modes: One is oriented toward threat, control, and survival. The other is oriented towards safety, connection, and restoration. These modes cannot be fully active at the same time. When the mind resists experience, when it demands that reality be different, the nervous system interprets this as danger. Stress hormones are released. Muscles tighten. Attention narrows. The body prepares to fight or flee. This happens even when the threat is emotional. An unwanted thought, an uncomfortable feeling, an uncertain future. The man realized that much of his exhaustion came from living in this activated state. Not because life was constantly dangerous, but because his mind was constantly arguing with it. Acceptance, he learned, did something radical at the biological level. It signaled safety. When he stopped resisting a feeling, when he allowed it to exist without judgment, the nervous system began to calm. Breathing slowed. Muscles softened. The brain reduced its constant scanning for problems. This did not mean the feeling disappeared immediately. It meant the war around it ended. The Buddha taught that suffering has two layers. The first is unavoidable: physical pain, emotional loss, uncertainty. The second is optional: the mental struggle against those experiences. Acceptance dissolves the second layer. The man tested this insight during moments of stress. When anxiety arose, instead of asking how to eliminate it, he allowed it to be present. He noticed where it lived in his body: tightness in the chest, heat in the face, restless energy in the limbs. He did not analyze it. He felt it. Neuroscience shows that when attention is directed toward raw sensation rather than interpretation, activity shifts away from the brain's threat processing centers. The emotional experience becomes less overwhelming, not because it is suppressed, but because it is processed. The man felt this shift directly. Anxiety that once spiraled into fear now rose and fell like a wave. It was uncomfortable, but it was no longer catastrophic. Acceptance did not remove discomfort. It removed panic. This distinction mattered deeply. The Buddha described this process as equanimity, a balanced mind that allows experiences to arise and pass without clinging or aversion. Equanimity is not indifference. It is openness without resistance. The man began to see how much of his suffering had been caused by the belief that certain emotions should not exist. He had treated sadness as failure, boredom as waste, uncertainty as threat. Acceptance reframed these experiences as natural. Sadness became information. Boredom became space. Uncertainty became openness. None of these states needed to be fixed. They needed to be felt. The modern world rarely encourages this kind of relationship with experience. It promotes constant stimulation, distraction, and control. Emotions are managed rather than met. Discomfort is avoided rather than understood. As a result, many people live in a state of chronic low-level stress. The man recognized this in himself. Even during calm moments, there had always been an undercurrent of tension, an anticipation of the next problem, the next demand, the next emotional fluctuation. Acceptance quieted this anticipation. By allowing the present moment to be exactly as it was, he removed the need to prepare for escape. Neuroscience calls this downregulation, the process by which the nervous system returns to baseline after activation. Acceptance accelerates downregulation because it removes the signal that something is wrong. The man noticed how his body responded when he accepted a moment fully. His breath deepened, his jaw unclenched, his shoulders dropped. The body trusted acceptance. The mind, however, took longer. Thoughts still questioned. Is this enough? Shouldn't I be doing more? But instead of obeying these thoughts, he observed them. This observation itself was acceptance, not of content, but of process. The Buddha emphasized that acceptance is not a belief. It is a practice. It is something done again and again, moment by moment. Each time resistance arises, acceptance is the choice not to add struggle. The man understood now why acceptance felt difficult at first. It required relinquishing control over emotional outcomes. It meant trusting that experience could unfold without constant management. This trust did not come easily, but it grew. He noticed that life continued even when he stopped trying to manage it. Emotions moved, situations changed, problems resolved or dissolved without his constant interference. Acceptance did not make him passive. It made him responsive. Instead of reacting automatically, he responded consciously. Instead of forcing solutions, he allowed clarity to emerge. Neuroscience supports this as well. When a nervous system is calm, the brain's problem-solving and creative capacities improve. Acceptance creates the conditions for wiser action. The man saw this in his own decisions. When he stopped reacting to discomfort, he made choices from clarity rather than urgency. He spoke more honestly. He rested when tired. He acted when action was needed. Acceptance was not the absence of action. It was action without fear. The Buddha taught that freedom does not come from controlling experience, but from understanding it. Acceptance is the doorway to that understanding. The man realized that he had been trying to think his way out of suffering. Acceptance asked him to feel his way through it. This was a different kind of intelligence. One evening, as he sat quietly, a familiar sense of dissatisfaction arose. In the past, this would have triggered a search for stimulation or meaning. This time, he did nothing. He allowed the feeling to exist. It passed. In its place was not happiness, but ease. A gentle sense that nothing needed to be fixed in that moment. The man understood now why acceptance felt like the opposite of chasing happiness. Chasing happiness says, this moment is not enough. Acceptance says, this moment is allowed. And in that allowance, the nervous system relaxes, the mind settles, and suffering loosens its grip. The Buddha never promised that acceptance would make life pleasant. He promised that it would make life livable. The man felt this promise becoming real, not as a belief, but as an embodied truth. He was no longer fighting his experience. He was living it. And in that living, something profound emerged. Not excitement, not bliss, but a deep, steady sense of okayness. For the first time, that was more than enough. For a long time, the man believed peace was something he would feel. He imagined it as a calm, pleasant emotional state, steady happiness without disturbance, a gentle warmth that stayed no matter what happened. He thought peace would arrive after everything was resolved, after uncertainty disappeared, after life finally aligned with his expectations. But the more closely he observed his own experience, the clearer it became. Peace was not behaving like an emotion at all. Emotions came and went. Calm rose and faded. Joy appeared briefly, then dissolved. Even moments of contentment were unstable, easily disrupted by a thought, a memory, or a sound. Yet beneath this movement, there were moments when something else was present, something quieter, less reactive, less fragile. It did not feel good in the usual sense. It felt open. The Buddha never defined peace as a permanent emotional state. He described it as the absence of inner resistance. Not the absence of pain, but the absence of struggle with pain. Not the presence of pleasure, but the absence of grasping for pleasure. This distinction changed how the man understood everything. He noticed that when sadness arose and he allowed it fully, there was peace within the sadness. When anxiety appeared and he stopped trying to eliminate it, there was peace alongside the anxiety. Even during moments of uncertainty, when he no longer demanded clarity, there was peace inside not knowing. Peace, he realized, did not replace emotions. It held them. Modern culture teaches people to chase emotional stability, to manage their moods as if they were indicators of success or failure. Peace is often portrayed as emotional control, a calm surface that never breaks. But the Buddha pointed to something far more subtle. Peace is not what you feel. Peace is how you relate to what you feel. The man began to recognize that most of his suffering had come from emotional intolerance. He believed certain emotions should not exist. He tried to suppress fear, outrun sadness, and fix boredom. Each attempt created tension. Peace emerged only when he stopped negotiating with his inner life. Neuroscience quietly supported this insight. Emotional regulation is not achieved by eliminating emotions, but by allowing them to be processed without interference. When emotions are allowed, the brain integrates them. When they are resisted, they persist. Peace, then, is not emotional silence. It is emotional permission. The man noticed how different his body felt when he allowed emotions to exist without labeling them as problems. His breath remained steady. His muscles stayed softer. His mind did not spiral into stories. There was space. In this space, emotions could move freely. The Buddha described this space as freedom. Not freedom from experience, but freedom within experience. Freedom from the compulsion to control, avoid, or cling. The man had once believed peace would arrive when life stopped challenging him. Now he saw that peace arrived when he stopped demanding that life be otherwise. This realization dismantled another illusion. He had thought peace meant detachment from life, withdrawal from intensity, or emotional numbness. But peace was not the absence of engagement. It was engagement without attachment. He could feel deeply without drowning. He could care without clinging. He could act without demanding outcomes. Peace allowed intimacy with life, not distance from it. The Buddha taught that clinging turns pleasure into fear and pain into suffering. When clinging ends, pleasure remains pleasant and pain remains painful, but neither defines the self. The man felt this truth in moments of loss. When something ended, a relationship dynamic, an expectation, a phase of life, there was sadness. But when he did not resist that sadness, it did not become despair. Peace remained present, like the sky behind changing weather. This image stayed with him. Emotions were weather. Peace was the sky. The sky did not control the weather. It did not eliminate storms. It simply allowed them to pass. The man realized how often he had mistaken the weather for the sky. He had believed that peace depended on emotional conditions. When emotions changed, he thought peace was lost. But peace had never gone anywhere. It had simply been obscured by resistance. Modern neuroscience explains this metaphor beautifully. When the brain is not caught in reactive loops, awareness becomes broader. Emotional activity still occurs, but it is not all-consuming. Perspective returns. The man experienced this perspective as spaciousness. Even intense emotions felt less absolute. They were real, but not total. Peace was not excitement. Peace was not happiness. Peace was not pleasure. Peace was the absence of inner conflict. This insight transformed how the man approached daily life. He stopped asking, "Do I feel peaceful?" and started asking, "Am I resisting this moment?" Often, resistance was subtle, a tightening in the chest, a mental argument, a desire to escape. When he noticed it and let it go, peace returned naturally. Not dramatically, not permanently, but reliably. The Buddha never promised permanent peace as an emotional state. He promised liberation from unnecessary suffering. The man understood now why chasing peace had failed him. He had been treating peace as an experience to acquire rather than a way of relating. Peace was not something to get. It was something to stop interfering with. He saw this clearly in ordinary moments. Washing dishes, waiting in line, sitting alone without distraction. When he allowed the moment to be exactly as it was, there was ease. Nothing special happened, and that was the point. Peace did not require special conditions. It required honesty. The man felt a quiet gratitude for this understanding. He no longer needed to engineer his emotional life. He no longer feared difficult feelings as threats to his well-being. Peace was no longer fragile. It could coexist with noise, uncertainty, and change. The Buddha taught that true peace arises when the illusion of control dissolves. When the mind stops demanding security from an insecure world. When it stops clinging to impermanent states as if they were permanent. The man did not feel enlightened, but he felt grounded. He understood now that peace was not an emotional peak to maintain. It was the ground beneath everything. And for the first time, he trusted that ground enough to stand still. For a long time, the man believed that letting go meant losing something. Losing ambition, losing passion, losing the sharp edge that drove him forward. He feared that without grasping, without holding tightly to goals, identities, and outcomes, life would become dull, directionless, or empty. He imagined a flat existence, stripped of intensity, where nothing truly mattered. This fear was understandable. The world had taught him that meaning comes from possession, from ownership of results, relationships, achievements, and even emotions. To care deeply was to cling. To love fully was to hold tightly. To live wholeheartedly was to attach oneself completely to what one desired. But as his understanding matured, he began to see that this equation was flawed. Grasping was not the same as caring. In fact, grasping often prevented true care. The Buddha taught that suffering does not arise from engagement with life, but from attachment, the insistence that life must unfold according to one's expectations. Attachment tightens around experience, turning love into fear, effort into anxiety, and meaning into pressure. The man began to recognize how attachment had distorted even the most beautiful parts of his life. When he loved, he feared loss. When he succeeded, he feared decline. When he found joy, he feared its end. Every moment of fullness carried a shadow. Living fully without grasping meant something radically different. It meant participating in life completely, while releasing the demand that it remain the same. It meant showing up wholeheartedly without trying to secure permanence from impermanent things. This was not detachment in the cold or distant sense. It was intimacy without ownership. The man tested this understanding in small, everyday ways. When he worked with focus, but without tying his worth to the outcome. When he connected with others, he listened deeply, without trying to control how he was perceived. When pleasure arose, he enjoyed it, without clinging or mentally rehearsing its disappearance. Something unexpected happened. Life felt richer. Without grasping, moments expanded instead of contracted. They were no longer burdened with the responsibility of lasting forever. They were free to be exactly what they were. Neuroscience offered a quiet explanation for this shift. When the brain releases its grip on outcomes, stress responses decrease. The mind becomes more flexible, more open, more responsive. Creativity increases. Presence deepens. Grasping narrows attention. Letting go widens it. The man felt this widening as a sense of ease. He could act decisively without anxiety. He could care deeply without losing himself. He could commit without clinging. This did not make him indifferent. It made him available. The Buddha taught that non-attachment is often misunderstood as disengagement. In truth, it is the highest form of engagement. When one is not clinging, one can meet each moment freshly, without projecting past fears or future demands onto it. The man noticed how often grasping had pulled him away from the present. He had been so focused on preserving experiences that he had not fully experienced them. A conversation became about maintaining connection rather than listening. A success became about sustaining identity rather than appreciating effort. A relationship became about security rather than presence. Letting go returned him to immediacy. He was no longer trying to extract something from life. He was participating in it. This shift changed how he understood commitment. Commitment did not require attachment. He could commit to values rather than outcomes, to honesty rather than approval, to effort rather than reward. The Buddha emphasized this distinction in the Noble Eightfold Path. Right action without craving for results. Action guided by wisdom, not hunger. The man saw how this freed him from internal conflict. He no longer had to choose between caring and peace. He could have both. He could strive without suffering. He could love without fear. He could act without clinging. Living fully without grasping also transformed his relationship with uncertainty. Previously, uncertainty had felt threatening because it undermined control. Now, uncertainty felt spacious. It allowed life to surprise him. He began to see that grasping was an attempt to freeze life. Letting go allowed it to move. This movement was not chaotic. It was alive. The Buddha taught that impermanence is not a problem to solve, but a truth to understand. When impermanence is resisted, suffering follows. When it is embraced, freedom emerges. The man experienced this freedom in moments of change. When plans shifted, he adapted more easily. When expectations were unmet, disappointment softened quickly. When loss occurred, grief moved naturally without turning into despair. Letting go did not eliminate pain. It prevented pain from becoming identity. Modern culture often equates intensity with depth. It celebrates passion that consumes, ambition that exhausts, love that clings. But the man was discovering a different kind of depth, one that was steady rather than dramatic. Depth that did not need to prove itself. Living fully without grasping did not make life smaller. It made it truer. He was no longer negotiating with reality. He was cooperating with it. When action was needed, he acted. When rest was needed, he rested. He trusted this responsiveness more than rigid plans. This trust did not come from optimism. It came from clarity. The Buddha never asked people to withdraw from the world. He asked them to withdraw from delusion, the belief that control brings safety, that possession brings peace, that happiness can be secured through force. The man saw now that grasping had been his attempt to make life safe. Letting go did not make life safer. It made him braver. Brave enough to feel without protection. Brave enough to love without guarantees. Brave enough to live without demanding certainty. In this way, letting go was not loss. It was courage. He could finally live fully, not because everything was under control, but because he no longer needed it to be. And in that freedom, life did not lose its meaning. It revealed it. The man once believed that awakening would arrive like an event. A moment of clarity so complete it would erase doubt forever. A breakthrough that would lift him above the messiness of ordinary existence. He imagined enlightenment as a finish line, crossed once, celebrated, secured. But nothing like that happened. Instead, awakening unfolded quietly, woven into the fabric of his everyday life. It arrived without ceremony, without announcement, without spectacle. It did not remove uncertainty or difficulty. It changed how he met them. Awakening, he realized, was not an escape from life. It was an intimacy with it. He noticed this most clearly in moments that once felt insignificant. Making tea in the morning, walking to the store, sitting in traffic, listening to someone speak without planning a response. These moments had always existed, but he had rarely been present for them. His mind had been elsewhere, anticipating, evaluating, chasing. Now, something had shifted. He was here, not because he forced himself to be, but because there was nowhere else he needed to go. The Buddha taught that awakening is not a state of permanent bliss, but the end of confusion. The confusion that happiness is somewhere else. The confusion that life must feel a certain way to be acceptable. The confusion that suffering means failure. When that confusion dissolves, life does not become extraordinary. It becomes honest. The man saw how much energy he had spent trying to transcend ordinariness. He had treated daily life as an obstacle, something to get through on the way to something better. Awakening revealed that there was nothing beyond it. This was not disappointing. It was liberating. He no longer needed to wait for permission to be at peace. Peace was not postponed until conditions improved. It was available in each moment he stopped resisting. This did not mean every moment felt pleasant. There were still difficult days, moments of sadness, waves of anxiety, times of uncertainty. But these experiences no longer threatened him. They did not define him. They did not signal that something had gone wrong. They were simply part of being alive. The Buddha taught that awakening is the recognition of impermanence, not as an idea, but as a lived truth. Everything arises. Everything passes. Clinging to what arises creates suffering. Resisting what passes creates suffering. Seeing this clearly brings freedom. The man felt this freedom not as excitement, but as steadiness. He was less reactive, less defensive, less driven by fear of loss or desire for gain. He still planned, still worked, still cared deeply. But he no longer demanded that life deliver happiness as proof of success. Happiness came and went. Peace remained. Awakening showed itself in how he responded to others. He listened with less urgency to impress. He spoke with less need to convince. He disagreed without hostility. He apologized without collapsing. He saw that everyone was struggling in their own way, chasing happiness, avoiding pain, trying to feel okay. This recognition softened him. Compassion arose naturally, not as a moral obligation, but as understanding. The Buddha taught that wisdom and compassion are inseparable. When one sees clearly, kindness follows, not because one should be kind, but because separation dissolves. The man felt this dissolution subtly. He was no longer standing apart from life, evaluating it. He was participating in it. Even suffering felt different now. When pain arose, physical or emotional, he met it without layering it with resistance. He did not ask, "Why me?" or "How do I get rid of this?" He asked, "Can I be with this?" Often, the answer was yes. And when it was no, he did not judge himself. Awakening did not make him invulnerable. It made him honest. The modern world often portrays awakening as a dramatic transformation, a visible shift that separates the awakened from the ordinary. But the Buddha's awakening did not remove him from humanity. It deepened his connection to it. The man saw now that awakening was not about becoming special. It was about becoming simple. Simple in attention, simple in relationship, simple in presence. He no longer needed life to be extraordinary to be meaningful. Meaning arose from direct engagement, not from outcomes. This understanding changed how he related to time. The future lost its grip. The past loosened its hold. He planned when needed, remembered when useful, but lived primarily now. Now was no longer a bridge to somewhere else. It was home. The final illusion to dissolve was subtle but powerful. The belief that awakening was something to maintain, something to protect from loss. But awakening was not a possession. It was a way of seeing, and seeing could return again and again. Some days he forgot. Old habits resurfaced. The chase reappeared briefly. Desire tightened. Resistance crept in. But now, forgetting was not failure. It was part of the rhythm. Awakening was not a permanent achievement. It was a continual return. Return to presence. Return to acceptance. Return to seeing clearly. The Buddha never promised a life without suffering. He promised a way of living that does not add unnecessary suffering to what already exists. The man felt the truth of this promise in his bones. He could meet life as it was, unfinished, uncertain, impermanent, and still feel okay. Not because everything was good, but because nothing needed to be different for him to be at peace. One evening, as he sat quietly, watching the world move without needing to follow it, a simple realization settled in, not as a thought, but as a knowing. Happiness had never been missing. It had been buried beneath effort, beneath expectation, beneath the belief that it must be chased. When the chase ended, life did not become perfect. It became sufficient. Awakening was not a destination. It was the end of running. And in that stillness, ordinary life revealed itself as enough, just as it was.